Okay.
Hi, Ray Dickey from. Now what happened, Dave? You just disappeared. You are such high maintenance. Such
I gotta
high.
get I gotta get my Bluetooth on.
Unbelievable. Look at Kevin. He's a total
No,
professional. He's ready to go.
but
He's not. I mean, he's got a full staff
There we
there
go.
doing his
Ray,
every
Ray,
step
and
of need.
I have professional camera training though, right? You know, Dave probably
Yes.
doesn't have that. So
Okay.
That's true. That's true.
All right. Ray Dickey from Association Help Now, CAI, South Carolina, Hudson Valley. Thank you so much for being here. We are talking about construction defects. And before I go any further, let's have our panel introduce themselves with who I see first, and that is Dave.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Byrne. I am the chairperson of my law firm's community association practice, Ansel Grimm and Aaron, and we represent condominiums, homeowners associations, and cooperatives in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania.
All right. And Kevin.
all right, Kevin Herzl, managing member of Herzl Law. We represent community associations all over the great states of Michigan and Illinois. Happy to be here, Ray. It's giving me a nice break from prepping for the law seminar case law update, which is taking up a lot of my December here.
Yeah, and don't forget, I don't know when we're going to air this, so just keep that in mind.
You just yeah.
Real quick, construction defect cases, they involve a lot of money for lawyers. Lawyers love construction defect cases. True or false, Kevin?
True.
You
So
submit.
I would, I'm going to tell you the truth on this. One of the things that I counsel all clients are before we're filing a lawsuit is whether it's cheaper to fix it or litigate it. Because a lot of these things, I mean, developers, they will leave things undone or not come back and fix things. But part of that is just they know the economics of it. It doesn't make sense to file that lawsuit. And depending on what jurisdiction you're in, there's different hurdles. So Michigan, a lot of those hurdles have been upheld. Illinois, not so much. But they make it, the documents themselves can make it very expensive to litigate these types of cases.
Hey, the reason why I brought that up is I want to get out there right away that there's no reason that an association should not reach out to someone if they feel they have a construction defect case, because these are cases that lawyers most of the time are going to take on contingency. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree only in the way, only in the use of the word most, because to me that suggests more than half. I think that lawyers are going to be aggressively reviewing to see whether a case would be a good one for contingency, but I find that many of them are not.
Okay.
And then
Yeah,
that may be,
generally,
frankly,
yeah.
that may be because of what Kevin suggested, which is the amounts involved may not be large enough. Ironically, the smaller the problem you have, the less likely it is that a lawyer would take it on a contingency.
Right. So Kevin, do you agree or disagree based on what Dave said? Obviously, if it's a bigger case, the lawyer's going to be interested. If there's money to be made and it's a solid case, the lawyer will do it on contingency. If it's something that's not so solid, you're going to
So
look
I'm going
at
to
it.
give you my favorite lawyer answer. It depends. And I'll
Okay.
just tell you, even in my own practice, some of these we've done hourly, a few we have done contingency, some of them we've even done both. So it's a hybrid approach with a blended lower hourly rate, and then some kind of contingency that wouldn't be as high as the normal contingency. But every case is different. And what I will tell you about construction defects, it typically comes down to the battle of the experts, and they are highly fact-intensive cases. So it's not, they're not often cases that can be won quickly, because typically each side is going to have their own expert who's going to disagree on whether a construction defect actually exists, what caused it. Some of the developers' favorite responses are, it was approved by the building inspector, which is kind of worthless to me. And then the other one is, well, when we gave it to you, it was fine, but you didn't maintain it. And then actually trying to figure out, where that lands and what the expert testimony, flushes out, is a big thing in these types of cases.
Yeah, and going on, picking up what Kevin said, all of which I agree with. The interesting thing about going to your question also about contingencies, at least in the 3 states where I practice, engineer, architect, expert fees cannot be contingent. So even if you make a arrangement with your lawyer where you're going to not pay any attorney fees unless you win, which is what a contingency agreement is basically. Although I agree with the blended rate thing Kevin was talking about too. A lot of lawyers do that, including us. But experts cannot do contingency work where I practice, which means that even if you find a lawyer who is willing to help you with a defect case on a contingency, you will still have to go out of pocket for experts. And depending on the type of case, the size of the case, the problems you're having, the expert costs could themselves be cost prohibitive.
Can't the lawyer, though, front those costs and then have the lawyer be under contingency?
Yes, but then that requires the case to be even larger. So back in years ago, my firm and I did that. We've helped to fund a client's expert costs, but the defects were valued at like $40 million. And we took a line of credit. I don't get too specific, but the firm took a line of credit. We felt confident. Everybody made out. The client was happy. They got a result. But that's not, at least in my experience in my 3 states, that's a rare thing. It's unusual. And any firm that's relatively small might have trouble floating that kind of expense.
So Kevin, I guess I could have done a better job. I guess what I was trying to do is I want boards and managers to understand that they should definitely reach out to someone if they feel they have an issue. They shouldn't wait, and they shouldn't sit on an issue like this, because many time matters, and these cases could be very strong sometimes, and they can get their repairs done and fixed. I'm trying to encourage them to reach out on if they believe they have a construction defect case.
So I would, first of all, once you go through turnover, you may not know you have any issues. So I tell everybody, in addition to getting a reserve study, now some reserve companies have civil engineers, and they will also do a separate study and a separate report for construction defects. But especially if you're starting to see issues, you should have a civil engineer come out and take a look at that. Because I see way too often, and it depends, on what jurisdiction I'm in. So in Michigan, it's typically either a 2 or 3 year statute of limitations. In Illinois, it's 4 or 5. But a lot of these boards, they wait till it's too long. It's 10 years down the road, and then they come to us and say, we have all these terrible problems. Engineering report comes back, say, this wasn't constructed according to code. It was all done wrong. But it's too late for them to do anything. And a lot of the developers also know what these statute of limitations are. And so they will play the game of trying to drag this out, and prolong repairs to try and run out that clock.
Right. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's the other concern I have with these before we even get started, where boards try to work this out on their own with the developer. And like you said, they can be, I'm not against all developers, don't get me wrong, but some of them could be very crafty, right, Dave? And they know exactly what they're doing. They're watching those statute of limitations run out. And I'll let you take it.
No, they are watching, and it is it's even worse than that. I don't necessarily mean worse in a way to allege that the builders and developers are nefarious. I just mean there are multiple components of even the statute of limitations. There are statutes of limitations that deal with fraud that are different in length than they are for contract claims. In New Jersey, for instance, we have what's called a statute of repose, which is different from a statute of limitation, which requires a whole different level of calculation. It also applies differently to individual contractors. So you may have a developer that built a building really horribly, but the developer didn't build it. He hired 6 contractors who then hired 4 contractors each. So now you're down to like 25 individual companies, but each of them have their own statute of limitation that's involved, and each of them has their own statute of repose that's involved. And lawyers who are really, really smart but don't work on these things even have trouble with those concepts. So it's very difficult for a board to navigate those, and boards have to be respectful of their fiduciary duty. They shouldn't be figuring things out that they don't really know how to figure out.
Right, Kevin. So a lawyer, like Dave is saying too, I want the boards to understand that. I'm glad Dave brought it up. There's multiple layers to this, multiple insurance companies. A lawyer is going to know where to dig, right? I'm probably wrong. I'm using an example. Asphalt, the nails, the glue that puts the asphalt on the roof, the wood. It just goes on and on and on. A lawyer like yourself or Dave, you're going to know where to start digging to have things work out best for the association. Is that true?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, and one thing I never expected when I went to law school is the amount that I would actually end up learning about construction. Now, I'm not a substitute for an actual engineer, but if I really want to nerd out, I'll start talking to somebody about alligator cracking, and why that makes the roads fail and what's wrong with the base course and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's something I can't unsee, when I'm walking around down the world
Right.
now. But a lot of these, as soon as I walk up, I'm walking into the clubhouse, I can see, you at least need to get this looked at, here. And in addition to the construction defect aspect of it, the lawyer is going to be able to help you dig into, some of the causes is why you may have issues, or even if you have repair issues when it was turned over, as the developer didn't contribute what they were supposed to for their financial contribution, whether that was through assessments or through proportionate to your expenses. The reserve fund wasn't funded. And so, a lot of these things, it's usually multifaceted in addition to construction defects. So it's really important you're negotiating and taking care of all of these issues at once. So, I mean, in my books, I have a checklist of all the things that you should be doing right away. And getting this engineering study is one of them, but a lawyer is certainly going to be able to walk you through this process, especially if you've never done it before.
I love how Kevin always brings up his book. You should be proud of your books. Your books are great. People love your books. But you're very good. And one of your associates the other day on one of the live streams actually held your book up. I forgot to send you an email and a clip of it and promoted it for you. It was pretty impressive.
Did it look something like this?
Yeah, he put it up and he almost made a pitch for it, but he did a great job. Dave, before I just want to reinforce the idea too that boards should not handle this on their own because of something Kevin just said. Problem A may be caused by something that a board is never going to know, right? And they're never going to reach out to that other company because they're not going to have that knowledge base. You're going to have that knowledge base or have people that know it.
Yeah, your original question was sort of know where to look, know where to dig, and pun intended when it comes to digging. We have a lot of, at least in New Jersey or even Philadelphia, with buildings that are built right on the water. They're building piers. They built out the whole attractiveness of the actual building is that it's on the water. It overlooks Manhattan or Philadelphia or any other sort of city. And when we're looking at a client has trouble and I see that it's out on the water or it's a high rise that's built on piers, and right away I look right away to see when the engineer's plans were done. You go in the offering plan with whatever state it calls offering plan or public offering statement, or and because you may have a claim against the engineer because of the way the engineer handled the support for the building in the water. And in New Jersey, for instance, you have 10 years from when the architect or engineer finished the plans. The project might have taken 20 years to get approved, or it may have taken 9 years to get approved. And that one day when the client first calls you, says, my building might be falling down, I'm along the Hudson River, and you wait 3 months to look at whether the engineer or the architect might be responsible, you may have just blown that whole claim, and that may be the major exposure. So it's not just like when the building was built, it's not just when the first unit was sold, it's when, as far back as when the very first architectural or engineering plan was drawn on someone's table, because the developer went there and said, I'm thinking about building a building on the Hudson River. How would you do it if I hired you?
And Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, to Dave's point, I mean, there's typically 3 different categories, and sometimes there's an argument as to what category the defect falls into. But sometimes the project was doomed from the start. It's the engineering, the design was bad. I've had cases where it's just a product defect. We had one case where the siding fell off all of the buildings, and there was a huge class action, and we were actually able to recover a substantial amount of money on behalf of the association without even filing a lawsuit. Once we really dug into this and figured out that there was a product defect. And then 3, which I'd probably say is the most common, is a workmanship, where somebody took shortcuts. I mean, there was one summer I spent, up in a bunch of attics, and the firewalls, none of them went to the ceiling, so a fire could have just blown through, the whole thing. And so a lot of different shortcuts are taken, or you'll see, trusses aren't, they're barely hanging together, they're not nailed together properly. So trying to figure out which one of those issues, it is one of the keys at the beginning of this as well.
some of the issues too they're not always complex. They're just like, they're preposterously wrong, right? Like the builder just runs out of material and stops putting flashing, or they start not using enough nails, or they're just missing insulation, right? It's almost comical, if it wasn't so expensive, Dave, how ridiculous and how poor the workmanship is.
True. That's definitely true. And I think the workmanship related, I agree with everything Kevin said. And I think the workmanship related claims are challenging in other ways as well, because just because one building, let's say in a condominium with let's say 15 buildings, just because one building has no flashing, you can't necessarily prove that all the other 14 don't have flashing. Okay, there's things called statistical sampling. A board can't just extrapolate out, oh my God, there's no flashing in this building, so therefore we must be missing flashing on all of the buildings. Especially when you find out later that the developer used 15 different contractors, and in fact may have fired the first contractor because he realized there was no flashing. So the other buildings might actually be perfect because the developer might have been like, oh, that guy's horrible, let's hire somebody good. That's the first thing. The second thing is workmanship also suggests workmanship sometimes, I guess, comes into the category, like Kevin said, I think early on, which was the cost of the problem. The cost of the problem may be low enough where you can just fix it. So workmanship is not, in my experience, is generally not the type of defect that generates multi-millions of dollars of claims. Normally, those huge claims are the ones where the engineer didn't didn't design the parking structure safe enough, or the architect designed the window frame too big, and then meaning that everything has to be fixed, that the parking deck has to be redone. That's multi-millions of dollars. But every window has to be replaced. That's multi-millions of dollars. Workmanship, missing firewalls and stuff, that could be complicated, but only if it's in every single. It's expensive only if it's in every single place, and if you have an architectural plan that didn't call for firewalls, even though the code required it, then you know for sure that every single thing has to be fixed. And then automatically you're talking a huge amount of money, as opposed to a workmanship, which is, you might find that 40% of them are actually pretty good. And so your damages aren't, multiplied by the number of firewalls. It's damages far less than that.
I guess the one thing, as far as a lot of the workmanship defects, it's important for board members to know there's latent defects and patent defects. And so, patent is going to be obvious. If you look, at the parking lot and there's a sinkhole there, like you see it, you should see it. You're not going to be able to extend, the statute of limitations. There's going to be no discovery rule. But what you're kind of talking about, some of the subsurface issues, for example, if there was drainage that wasn't connected that's below the surface, or there's foundational issues that are below the surface, things like that, those are going to be much less obvious. And so you may be able to get additional time once the defect actually manifests itself, and it's going to be less likely to actually be discovered.
I see here, Dave, that there's even like a soundproofing case at some point. That seems like a weird one for construction defects, right?
Yeah, it seems like a weird one. Because I would be skeptical of a soundproofing related claim, because that would be, and I'd be interested to hear what Kevin's perspective is on this, but the soundproofing thing might not easily translate into something that the condominium could actually litigate, because I don't know that a condominium has standing to get damages for really loud stuff. Like the condominium brings a claim when the wall is going to fall down, because the condominium has legal obligation to make sure the walls don't fall down. But oftentimes the condominium doesn't necessarily have an obligation to make sure that it isn't loud, because especially when noise is very subjective. One guy's, loud TV shows, another guy's, I can't even hear it. So normally with the sound related stuff, I would be skeptical as a condo lawyer as to whether or not the condominium actually had a transition or defect claim with that.
Kevin?
So, Ray, I mean, it's the number one difficulty on that is actually being able to find a good acoustical engineer, because I've had to deal with this issue before. And so you can't just hire a regular civil engineer as the expert.
Right.
But typically, where I've seen this, and it kind of goes to David's point, is a lot of times this relates to whether there's appropriate insulation. Code is typically going to have some kind of requirement that typically will be in the common elements. But if it's just, one unit's complaining of noise, the other units are fine, it's actually being able to do enough testing, take a look at the plans and figure out whether the insulation and the soundproofing that was installed, whether that actually met the design plans and code. But I would say this is going to be one of those ones that's harder to prove, and it's going to be a little bit more subjective, unless you're really in there with the decibel meters, or you can prove that they didn't put in the right kind of insulation, or it wasn't. It's easier to prove it's a design defect as opposed to a workmanship defect.
Yeah, I was
Very
thinking
easy.
when I read it, I was thinking more like it's the way they marketed the building in some manner, and they were promoting like soundproofing, and then the builder didn't come through.
Right. Well, see, and that creates a whole nother issue in a lot of ways, because the marketing, and this is probably a state by state thing too, especially with how the disclosure laws are interpreted. But it could be very challenging to get a disclosure fraud related claim to be litigated successfully by the actual association when the representations were made to individual buyers. New Jersey as a whole, and Pennsylvania has a whole sort of set laws on when associations are allowed to make claims with respect to that and when they're not. It's not as clear cut. There are different statutes of limitation when it comes to owner claims for disclosure violations. So it's you can't just assume that because the developer had a lie or a misrepresentation or an omission in a disclosure document that all of a sudden the condominium has a claim for that. And I think a lawyer would be making a mistake if he or she led his board to believe that they could make a claim for that, because and New York is very strict in this. New York is, which is ironic given that maybe how some people think that New York's laws might be more liberal in terms of litigation and such. But New York's very strict. It's very difficult to take an individual fraud-related disclosure problem vis-a-vis a developer and an owner and make it a condominium claim. It's very hard to do that. And it's even harder in New York because some fraud claims are exclusively within the jurisdiction of the Attorney General. You don't even have a private right of action in New York for some of these claims. So the disclosure related claims are very challenging in this context.
So Dave, I'm going to invite you to my friendly fraud jurisdictions. Pretty much every single construction defect case that I've ever filed has had some sort of fraud-based element to it. But the law is different than what you said. And part of it is like the Condo Act, it will actually incorporate the Consumer Protection Act, or the Condo Act will require the developer to have all these certain disclosures. And if there's a material omission, you can sue them for a violation of the Condo Act, which it says the association has specific standing. So it's statutory standing.
Right. And we don't have that. Right.
Where the line is drawn is whether it relates to the units or the common element. So if somebody they screwed up everybody's granite in their kitchen, that's not something that the association can handle. But if they didn't disclose that the swimming pool was going to collapse and it wasn't built properly, or they didn't put in any base course under the parking lot and just paved it over, that's all fair game where I'm at.
Right, and we have something.
Hold on a second. I got to give you some direction here. Like, let me play junior director here a little bit, okay? You got to leave gaps in between when you're going back and forth, because I can't edit these things into shorts when it's this rapid fire and there's no time in between. That's why I'm trying to put myself in between you guys so I could do my editing, right? The second part, Dave, you don't want to like comment when Kevin's talking, because if I just want to use something that's Kevin is saying.
Oh yeah, you told me that. I know you told me that before. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's so you don't have any camera training. It's okay.
It's okay. It's fine. Dave, with that being said, what did you want to add? Sorry.
No, I was going to add that like in New Jersey, we have a Consumer Fraud Act, which is probably every state probably has something that they may just call it something different. But like in New Jersey, we have a Consumer Fraud Act, which is there's fee shifting. So if you prove a claim, you get your attorney fees. In New Jersey, you can get your attorney fees shifted even if you don't actually prove the consumer fraud claim. It's nuanced, but all you have to do is show some ascertainable loss, even if it's $1. Uh, but you still have to show some ascertainable loss. So a condominium may not have loss because an owner was told that it's going to be quiet. What's the association's loss if it turns out to be noisy? You'd lose that one. And in like states like New York, for instance, you can't make a fraud claim, which is no different than a breach of contract claim. So developer says, I'm going to give you a really awesome condo unit and you're going to love it. Okay, that's the contract. That's part of the contract. You can't then claim that it's fraud because they didn't give you a really great unit that you're going to love. It's a breach of contract claim. It's not a fraud claim. Fraud has to be something like extra on top of that.
So what happened is you guys got all excited. Okay, like I'm very interested in the fraud part, and I'd like to be able to pull that out. But I thought the fraud thing was so interesting. You just went off to the races on it. There's no way I could edit.
I think it's Kevin's fault. Kevin's fault.
It wasn't. I don't want to pick on anybody. I don't want to say it was Kevin's fault. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to, but you have to.
After all, you're only a junior director, Ray.
All right. Because you kind of went ahead, and for me, like I have a basic question because I feel like we went over it. Okay.
Okay.
Now I have to like just relax for a second and get caught up. Okay. Because you guys threw a lot of things at me. When there's a construction defect case and the builder purposely left things out like flashing or insulation, and they knew it, somebody knew it, how is that not a fraud case? And then my second question is going to be, and you can combine it if you want to, does that make a difference to the association whether something is fraud or it is not? So do you want me to break that into two questions or do you want to have it as one? Because I'm going to re-ask it.
Probably two questions, I guess. So that's what I think.
Let me rephrase. So once again, why isn't a builder who knowingly leaves materials out of a project, flashing, insulation, doesn't use enough nails, how is that not a criminal fraud case? And let me start with Kevin on this one.
So number one, these entities, they're very complex. They subcontract a lot of stuff out. So the typical defense is, I didn't know, I didn't see this. The building inspector passed it, so everything had to be okay. So, ultimately, they will also have an expert that says what they did is okay. It wasn't material. It was just a slight deviation, whereas typically the association's expert is going to have a wildly different opinion that this is material. It's a health, safety, structural type of issue and that kind of thing. And so I would say it's really difficult to just say, it's fraud if they knew about it or not, because all these cases, I've yet to have a developer come along who's actually taken a position that you did and said, yeah, we knew we did this all wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it.
There's many cases where construction defects just involve missing flashing. How is that not fraud when they just run? How can they get away with putting flashing on building A and not putting flashing on building B and get away with that not being fraud?
Because fraud requires more than just not doing what you're supposed to do. Like common law fraud, for instance, there's what's called a reliance element. You have to rely on it. The condominium never purchased anything, and therefore it didn't rely on any developer promise to put flashing in. The fact that common law fraud stuff doesn't really work for these types of transactions is why legislatures created things like the Consumer Fraud Act, which don't tend to involve reliance. What you're describing might be a Consumer Fraud Act claim. It just may not be a common law fraud claim. Because in a Consumer Fraud Act claim, you still have to prove either misrepresentation, like a lie, okay, or omission. And if you could prove that the developer knew that even though he promised a building that was watertight, wouldn't leak, those kinds of things, and he knew it was going to leak and did it anyway, that probably would be consumer fraud. If you could prove that, sure. Later, if you ask questions about warranties, that changes the dynamic a little bit as well.
Sticking with Dave, and then I'll go to Kevin. Is there any advantage to an association if fraud could be proven and a construction defect case. And maybe those two terms don't belong in the same sentence.
I'm going to say, like I think Kevin said earlier, I'll give you a lawyer answer, which was it depends. I'm going to say, give you a lawyer answer and say yes and no. Yes, it helps because if you actually can prove fraud, then theoretically your damages will be larger and you'd be entitled to fee shifting. So the client would be entitled to most, if not all, of its attorney fees back. That's very positive. But the negative of that is most of these situations, when the numbers are high, meaning when the damages are significant, most of the recovery, at least in the state, at least in New Jersey and New York, not so much Pennsylvania, but New York and New Jersey, most of the recovery comes from insurance companies through different theories of how insurance policies are reviewed. It depends on a lot of the state Supreme Court opinions that are issued. And you don't get coverage for fraud, but you get coverage for negligence. So you can spend 3 years of litigation proving that your developer and your contractors are horrible people and they lied and they lied and they lied, and you get a $20 million verdict against them all, and you find out the insurance company won't pay it, and all the people you got judgments against are judgment proof. They have no money, which is almost always the case for other reasons when you're dealing with developers, the way they're structured, at least in New Jersey and my states. So sometimes, at least in my cases, we tend to downplay the fraud. We find the fraud to be sexy and fun to talk about at owner meetings, but we find them they're obstacles to actually getting a settlement. They're obstacles to getting money, which is ultimately your fiduciary duty as a board, which is not to, make a big noise, but your job is to get money to fix the building. And one last thing, fraud is not always a good thing because you don't necessarily want the public at large to believe that you live in a building that was the victim of fraud and malfeasance. I mean, you ultimately have to sell your home at some point again, and you may want to tamp down on the fact that the developer that built your place is a crook.
I would have never thought about that in a million years. There's a lot of reasons why an association doesn't want to claim a constructive defect claim to turn into a fraud case. And one of those main reasons is insurance. I think that would just end the whole discussion on that right away, right? Because construction claims are all about insurance companies. They're not about the actual builders. True or false?
False. And so here's the reason. A lot of insurance policies, they will have what they call a your work exception to them. So while there are exceptions for fraud, typically you need to have some kind of an accident, an occurrence, some form of property damage. A lot of policies are going to have an exception, and there will not be coverage if somebody just did a sloppy job. And so, from my perspective, the calculus is probably a little bit different in that, as far as pleading goes, claims for the implied warranty of habitability, that something doesn't function the way that it should, negligence, those are typically going to be easier to prove because you don't necessarily have to prove what the developer knew or didn't know. You just have to prove that the thing didn't work, it wasn't designed correctly. So it's easier to prove. The upside of the fraud claims, as David was talking about, is it can give you more leverage. So you can, depending on the statute, potentially, attorney fee shifting. I mean, that's something under the consumer protection statutes, the condo acts, punitive damages, those kinds of things. And so it really kind of, depends on the particular circumstance. But, typically my strategy is you only get one bite at the apple. So you put it all in there and see what happens. But I mean, I do, later on, we may want to touch on kind of the golden triangle of these cases, which is the collectability, the liability, and the damages, and that you need all three to have your, construction defect stool stand up. And without one of them, you may have issues. So typically what I see on the insurance end is they really view these more so on the cost of defense. They offer settlements based on the cost of defense. And they know that if they get into one of these where there's a developer and 20 subcontractors, they're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees defending this over years. And so they still will come to the table, even if there's coverage issues. But pretty much every kind of case I've seen like this, they've always said there's some kind of a coverage issue.
Can I chime in on that too, Ray? Give it back. This is Kevin, so interesting because this is another example of the state by state issue. New Jersey's Supreme Court has ruled that commercial general liability policies don't provide coverage for quote unquote your work, just like you said. Totally agree. But they do provide coverage for the work of others. So what we have to allege and prove is we allege that all the negligent work was done by contractors. And so the general contractor's policy provides coverage for the subcontractor's work. And then the subcontractor's policy provides coverage for the subcontractor work. So you're totally right. Even our Supreme Court has ruled that the your work exception is totally legit and it's binding. But the way around it is the targeting of the policies for other people's work. That's how we litigate that. There's also a dynamic of consequential damages too. Our Supreme Court has made it clear that these builders policies do not provide coverage for direct damages, but they do provide coverage for consequential damage. So real quick, Ray, direct damage would be developer puts a bad roof on your building. Okay. The cost to get a new roof is direct damage. Our Supreme Court says that now it depends on what the insurance policy says, but almost all of them are in the same way. So it doesn't really matter. So our Supreme Court in New Jersey says that assuming you have the normal policy, you do not have coverage for a new roof. But if you prove that the faulty roof caused damage to the plywood around the roof or the sheetrock around the roof, you have coverage for that. That's consequential damage. The consequence of the claim is covered, but not the cost to fix the actual thing that was wrong. Again, another reason why you have to really, lawyers that have solid experience with these things is very important. And that golden triangle thing, I wrote that down. I'm going to use that from now on. I love it. Kevin, I always visualized it that way. But the one leg to a stool thing that's the key. I mean, if you don't have 3 legs to a stool, the stool falls down. I mean, you got to have all 3. Got to have all 3.
I was going to ask Kevin if you just made that up, or like it's a common term. But like go through the three terms. Let's talk about Kevin. Let's talk about you used the term golden triangle. Yep. What are those three terms?
So it's collectability, liability, and so if you want to talk about the first one, collectability, Dave,
can you say it over? Because I think I lost you on, for some reason I thought you dropped
damages was the one that was blocked out.
Yeah, so it's collectability, liability, and damages is what composes the golden triangle. So for collectability, this is a question for Dave here. Is your favorite game trying to pin the tail on who's the developer? So I will tell you that one of the big struggles that we have here, and I would say this is with even the largest national developers, is that they create a single purpose entity for pretty much every single project they do. Now, so where some of the fraud claims come in is they will market this as, we're this single huge entity. We're the largest builder in the United States. When you buy this, you're going to get a quality product that, matches, what our national reputation is. But in reality, that doesn't exist. There's so many different corporations and holding companies by the time that you get down to it, actually, trying to figure out who is the developer. And sometimes it's identified as different people in the condominium documents, the purchase documents. Some people own the land, and there's the construction people, then the real estate arm. And so that's always a big issue that you have to determine, am I going to be able to pierce the corporate veil? Am I going to end up with an entity if there's no insurance that's going to be able to pay a judgment here? So that's the collectability stool or leg of the stool.
But why did you give me a hard time about when I was saying that most of these involve insurance? Because that's really, you're going to get paid from the insurance company, right? I totally misunderstood this, because I thought the first thing that you guys look at is how many insurance companies are involved here, because you're going to get the money from the insurance company. It's not going to go out of business. The builder could go out of business. They could just not pay you. You could be chasing the builder for years. You're not going to be chasing the insurance company.
You only get money from an insurance company. Well, Kevin's right. You get money from insurance companies almost always when it's just cost of defense. They might as well put $50,000 towards settling the claim than pay a lawyer $50,000. But what we're talking about you only get money if you only get $3 million or $7 million from an insurance company when the insurance company has coverage. I mean, insurance companies aren't in the business of just giving money out because you sue them. I mean, that'd be great, I guess, until they all went bankrupt. They're only going to pay money out if they feel they have coverage. And in some states, you don't have coverage for these types of things. In some states you do, like in New Jersey, I just said, very, very, very supportive of condominium and HOA claims for insurance. But in many states, it's not like that. So you only get the money if there's coverage. It's not just automatic. And there's also a problem with coverage limits. Okay, you might have a policy, $1 million policy, $1 million per claim policy. You're a subcontractor, you did a crappy job, and your damages that you caused, your consequential damages you caused are $3 million. And your insurance company says, yeah, you know what, we probably have coverage for this because it's consequential. The exceptions don't apply. But here you go, here's $1 million. Yeah, but the claim's 3 million. Well, so that's not my problem. I gave a policy of $1 million. That's all you get.
You know, I may have underestimated this, Kevin. I thought this was like a slam dunk for you guys. Like I thought like you just basically like take on a case and you find every insurance company that ever walked on the property, you send them a letter and they send you some money.
So I will tell you, in a lot of the cases, I wish it was that easy. Then we take them all on contingency, right?
Yeah.
But I will tell you that in a lot of these construction defect cases, you know, if there's a settlement, in my experience, is a combination of a contribution between some form of the development entity and the insurance companies, and there ends up being a pool of money, you know, that's created from that. But on the development entity side, you know, if you're a large national entity, I mean, you do have reputational concerns. If the project's not done, it can interfere with sales, financing, you know, that kind of thing. So I would say you have a higher degree of risk if you have, you know, kind of a smaller developer who doesn't care and doesn't care about the reputation, you know, of just walking away. But oftentimes what I've seen, you know, if you have a reputable developer that, you know, they're not going to just say, you know, go ahead and take a judgment against my entity and we'll call it a day, and want that out there in the world and the public. Because oftentimes in these disclosure documents, you have to disclose whether you've been sued, whether there's any judgments against you, whether the project's being sued. And so all those things can be problematic for business reasons for them.
And then also, Dave, the developer could just fix the problem too. It's not like you're just going to get handed a bunch of money, right? The developer could turn around and say, like, we're going to fix all these things.
The dynamic is so interesting because yes, but the larger the problem, the less likely is the developer is going to fix it. I mean, yet the real world implications here are that a developer creates an entity, single use entity, like Kevin said, and then it goes out and hires all the contractors. If there's $5 million worth of damages, this entity doesn't have $5 million sitting around. It has to get the money from other people and all the contractors. And if it did its contracts right, if it did its indemnification provisions right, it has the right to get the money from all the other people. But none of that happens until there's a lawsuit, because when a lawsuit's filed, then it triggers all the insurance policies to honor claims, and then they get together and maybe work something out. I've found in the real world of these things, once you get into a case, you do discovery and everything sort of works itself out, you know, that especially in a mediation context, I found this almost always the case. The developer and the condominium are on the same side. They want everybody else to pay. So the developer says, yeah, this building was built like crap, and I'm really sorry that I hired these idiots to do it. So the condo should get $3 million. And the condo's like, yeah, the building's built like crap, I want $3 million. The other side is like, no, we built it wrong. We built this part right, but the sheetrock was bad. They're arguing not necessarily over like the fact that it was globally built right or wrong. They're arguing over individual things. But the teamwork is the developer and the condo are on the same side. They want insurance companies to pay and they want subcontractors to pay. And the subcontractors are in one room pointing the fingers at each other, and the insurance companies are in the third room trying to see whose coverage applies to what water damage. Oh, no, water damage was all in 2021 to 2022. You guys have coverage for that. We're fireman's fund. We only gave coverage for 2023 and 2024. I don't see any evidence of leaks in those years. So you guys have to pay. So again, I guess the summary is when you get into something, you find out the alliances change, and it's not personal. It's just about who has the money and how you're going to get the money to the right people. But developers and condo boards are oftentimes on the same side when you get into these things.
Why would a board, Kevin, why would it be in their best fiduciary duty to ever take a case on like this that's under contingency? Because it's such an unbelievable, we're talking so much money here, what you guys are talking about. It seems like a huge gamble to me.
So yes and no. But you either live with it or you pay for it. Like ultimately,
Yeah.
the goal is to hold the developer responsible. So in most of these cases, it's got to get fixed anyways. And so, if you are going to the owners and saying, you're going to have an assessment, everybody's going to have to pay $100,000 to fix this thing, they're going to say, well, why aren't you doing something to hold them accountable? But I will say on the collectability aspect and kind of, what Dave was talking about, is that oftentimes you have to get creative in these situations as to what the ultimate solution is. So ideally, the insurance company in Ray Dickey's world backs up the insurance. They dump all the insurance money at Dave and I's feet. We collect a contingency and we move on. Practically, that rarely happens. So in a lot of these cases, one of the first things I will do, even before there's a lawsuit, even if, a demand letter, I will see if I can do a walkthrough and create a punch list. The board will walk through, we'll have an engineer walk through if the attorneys want to walk through. And so a lot of the workmanship types of things, a lot of times developers will send their trades out, or they have warranties, or they may fix those right off the bat. And they may come up with a list of 100 things that are typically going to be minor irritants. Then you have another host of things that is typically like ADA compliance, whether, the roof was put on right, like all these different things that are more systemic type of issues. And what I see happening there is, we're going to agree to disagree, but make a business decision that we'll see if we can assign a dollar value to this. So a lot of times these settlements, it's a combination of work and money. It's fairly rare that I've just seen it all be work. But I mean, that's possible. But at the very least, you need to set yourself up for success. At least give yourself a chance. So the developer, has to respond. They have to respond to a demand letter. They think that there's at least a threat, of being sued, because if you just throw your hands up and do nothing, you really have no leverage to get them to do anything or to contribute money to fix the problem.
I'll start with Dave. How does an association know just not to let something go? Okay, so on the board, there's a problem with a roof. You call the developer, he comes back, he fixes that roof. How do you know you just didn't make a big mistake, that you should have contacted an attorney and say, look over the entire place? It seems like a guessing game, right? Because you don't necessarily know if you have a problem everywhere. Maybe
Right.
It was just not one spot. Like, how is a board supposed to know where to pull the trigger on this?
They're not. A professional management should be capable enough to deliver a very simple message to a board, which is you have an obligation, as Kevin said, to fix these things no matter what. Maintain, repair, and replace common elements. You got to do it. You have a short window of time, though, within which you can get other people to help you do it, meaning those who are responsible for the bad work. You have a small window of time to look into that. And in order to not lose that time, you have to hire people to look at stuff. Professional management should be able to deliver that message. And that I would think that a professional manager expert would, if it ever got to this point, would be able to opine that if you hire the legit professional management companies, that their standard of care would be to a new building, a new community, to advise you to investigate the quality of construction. And to do that, you have to hire experts and you have to hire lawyers. Not spend $1 million, but you have to get legal opinions from lawyers as to what your rights are. You might be free to disregard the opinion, but it's a mistake not to have an opinion. And I think professional management would also be capable enough within the standard of care to tell you to hire an expert to look at things. Again, you could decide that it'll be cheaper for us to fix it than fight. That's totally fine. But a board that does not do those two things, I think, is really teetering on the edge of a fiduciary duty problem.
If a board contacts the manager about a leak in the roof, and then the manager just takes care of the issue, takes care of the problem, right? The developer comes back and they fix it. But it turns out it was a huge construction defect case. Did the board not conduct their fiduciary duty?
So here's my advice on this, Ray, is just go out and hire a civil engineer whenever they're, if you have a big project, especially, for attached units, high rises, all that kind of stuff, it's water always wins. So whether it's the roof, the foundation, if you're like David near it, odds are you're going to have some kind of issue. So once you start seeing a couple of these, definitely have the engineer come out, because then you can rely on the engineer's report. You're protected by the business judgment rule. they will make a determination whether there are construction defects, whether further investigation is warranted or not warranted, whether this is a $5 million problem or a $5,000 problem. If you don't do that, you don't have business judgment rule protection. You have no expert advice, and at that point, you're just guessing. You are subjecting yourself to a potential breach of fiduciary duty claim. If you have that report, then you can actually make the business judgment rule decision, and you're protected. And you're likely going to be in a spot where you're going to be able to do something about it.
But boards love to have management companies, Kevin, because they love to feel like they could just dump it all on the management company. And if the manager tells them not to worry about it and they write it down, can't they just not worry about it and the board will be in the clear?
You have to rely on the advice of an expert. A management company is not going to be qualified to make a determination on a construction defect, what is and what isn't. A lawyer is not going to be qualified, in most circumstances, to identify, what the engineering standards are, that should have been followed. And so the business judgment rule and what most statutes say is you have to reasonably rely on the advice of somebody who's an expert and qualified to give that. So the management company, they're probably not going to be the crutch here, and I just tell you, since these are often multi-million-dollar issues, spending $5,000-$10,000 to have somebody come out, make a detailed report, do a thorough inspection, it's well worth it.
Dave, a board that relies on a manager's expert opinion on whether or not there's an engineering issue can still be held for not following their fiduciary duty because they should have never relied on that manager anyway. Is that correct?
Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah. They'd have a claim against the management company for their own breach of duty. They got, like, my view is a management company, a professional management company, should know enough. The standard of care for a professional management company is that in the early stages of a community's existence, it's incumbent upon a board to investigate its legal rights and its engineering/architectural rights. That's how they go about that. There's probably a lot of discretion, but a management company, I think, should have enough. Their standard of care is to do that, I think, and it would be a mistake to do that. Well, ironically, in your example, if a developer comes out to fix something, that isn't always a bad thing, meaning it doesn't always necessarily mean you're covering something up. It would most likely trigger an extension of statute of limitations, at least in New Jersey. It would also probably keep alive warranty claims, which are also available in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Statutory warranty claims.
And Ray, one other thing to be real careful of in this circumstance is most condominium acts, they will allow you to terminate the management contract, with the management company after developer turnover within a certain amount of time, and choose your own management company. I think part of the reason for that is that a lot of these developers, they will pick one management company and give them 20 properties. So there's a pretty tight business relationship there. And so they are probably not going to be as inclined to point out all these different issues, or you should go hire an attorney, or you should hire an engineer to create problems for the developer that gives them all these properties to manage, from the get-go. So that would be another reason, just as a practical matter, you should be a little bit skeptical of relying on a management company for advice in this area.
That's exactly what I was thinking. We're assuming that all the management companies are professionals, and the ones that listen to us, I know they're professionals, but there's so many other ones out there that they're just going to play along with exactly what you just said. Okay, so Kevin, we're totally impressed. Dave and I are. I don't know if anyone else is. By your golden triangle of construction defect claims. Okay, item number 1 was collectability, which we just discussed. What is the second part of the stool, as Dave added?
All right, the second leg here is liability. So we've already kind of touched on this a little bit. But it's basically, whether you can prove something wrong. And I will see a lot of associations just say, well, it leaks or it did this, and it's 5 years later. Sometimes it is a maintenance issue, or after they took it over, the lawnmower came along and crushed all the drains or ruined the sprinklers or whatever it is. So you actually have to show that it's something that they were responsible for and they're at fault for this. And the two major theories of liability, you have the implied warranty of habitability, which means something ought to operate the way that it was intended to. And so that, and the negligence type of claims are some of the major theories, that are here. And then the fraud-based claims, but also the ones that we see a fair amount is that the developer representatives, they will have a spot on the board at the beginning of this. And so oftentimes they have the same fiduciary duty as the other board members that come along afterwards, but they will not spend the money to fix something or do something about the issues, because it means holding their own company, liable or accountable for this. So those are kind of the major theories that we see that, maybe you may not be able to get after the development entity, but if this person sat on the board, maybe there's a potential D&O claim there, or even if not, they may have personal liability. And so really it's trying to line up what those theories of liability are and assign responsibility for that, is the second big thing here for the stool to stand up.
Dave, I'm a board member on a developer controlled board. I think there's a construction defect case, but the other board members, they're tied in with the developer. They're not cooperating. What can I do as that board member? I guess you'd refer to it as start the clock, stop the clock. You could take it from there.
Well, your example, the board member is an owner, elected board
Right.
member.
It's a developer controlled board, and you're one of the owners. You're going to be there forever. And
The owner has almost no rights, legally and practically, meaning, a lawyer wouldn't be able to fund anything anyway. My advice, and I've given this advice to people situated like this: make motions, ensure the board is having the statutorily required meetings, state by state, but in many states there are specific requirements that board, even when developer controls the board, you're supposed to have meetings. The meetings are supposed to be open to the attendance of owners. A board member should make a motion. I like to make a motion to hire an engineer to figure out why the roof is leaking. Nobody seconds it? Okay, minutes will reflect. Board member Bob made a motion to hire an engineer to figure out why the board was leaking. Nobody seconded the motion. Well, at that point, that makes the developer appointed trustees, puts them personally in the crosshairs. In New Jersey, for instance, we have a special statute that requires developer appointed trustees to operate as if they were elected by the owners.
So Kevin, would that be considered notice though, in regard, because I know we get involved with warranties and timeframes, and you call it repose, right? I mean, so is that good enough notice, the fact that it was brought up a meeting, even though the developer control board didn't take action on it?
So you have a fiduciary duty to do that, but I will tell you, one of the big things in these circumstances is most state statutes, the time period to pursue the developer does not, begin to run until the majority of the board is controlled by non-developer co-owners. So that's typically, at least, in the jurisdictions that I'm at, that's the rule of thumb. What can get tricky though is not all developers follow the statute, and it's typically based on when there was election and when these people were elected. And a lot of times it will just be, here's a pile of stuff, you're in charge now. So actually making sure that you have a proper meeting, document when that transition occurs, is really essential to establishing liability.
Okay.
Go
ahead,
let me just add one more thing. Again with the state by state thing, but in New Jersey, and I'll say, like, for instance, in New York, it is completely opposite from what Kevin said. Again, it's state by state. So in New York, the statute of limitations for breach of contract claims, which is how you would mostly generate a construction defect claim, begins to run when the first unit is sold. Okay, that's pretty much set forth. In New Jersey, new law has made it clear that the statute of limitations begins to run when the owners take control of the board. So that's consistent with what Kevin's is doing in his jurisdictions. But the statute of repose explicitly is not triggered by that. So if I'm an engineer and I draw a set of plans 12 years ago, I got my 10-year get out of jail free card. Doesn't matter when the owners took control. So a lawyer that's representing associations can't, at least let's say in New Jersey, for instance, can't just rely upon the fact, oh, we're good. We're 4 years from when the owners took control of the board, so we're good. Well, no, you're not good if most of your claim is against the engineer and his plans were 11 years ago, and you could have sued him 3 years ago, but you didn't. Then you as a lawyer have the problem, at least in New Jersey. So it's not as clear. Logically, you would think that nothing should run until the owners take control, but that's not always the case, even though it should be.
Okay, well, I have to ask. I've been holding off asking. It's such a broad question, but I don't care, and I'm watching our time here. Why are the laws so different? Is this because lawyers want to make money? Is it because legislators all have different views? I'm actually starting to feel sorry for the developers. If you're like a national developer, how can you possibly keep track of all these? Why are they, Kevin, why are they so different?
So for somebody who's had some involvement in legislation, I would say the developers are not the people you need to feel sorry for. It's the community associations that typically get the short end of the stick. And a lot of that is just because the developers, they typically have multiple organizations that are lobbying on their behalf. And it really all depends on, who's in control and what you can get through. But oftentimes they will have a much more powerful lobby and be able to do things like shorten, the statute of limitations or negotiate, these different things that, community associations, for the nonprofit struggle to actually, get enough money and influence in the lobby to do that. So the CIs typically do a good job. If there's bills that come up, they will come testify. They will educate, the members of the legislature. But for me, this is an area that I think is fraught with special interests, and everybody's always trying to improve their situation from one year to the next, depending on what the political landscape is.
Okay, Dave, I have a construction before I go to the last question, which is the other part of the stool. Dave, I have a construction defect case. I'm curious. You covered New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York. Kevin, you're Illinois and Michigan. Where am I better off living if I'm the board? What state?
Oh, and the hypothetical is you have a condo building, let's say a high-rise building type of thing, and it's built like crap. Is that the hypothetical?
Yep. The roof is defective. They're leaking.
Oh, in my three, it's easy. It's New Jersey. That's the best place to be.
For me, it's Illinois. No question. Statute of limitations are longer, more consumer-friendly laws. And so there's a lot more that you could get done there. And you also kind of have the tool of, there that you can complain to the government and they may actually do something, or come in, they could threaten deconvert. They have a lot more tools the municipalities will employ in Illinois than they do in Michigan to actually help correct some of these issues.
Okay, Kevin, the last part of the stool, it was collections, it was liability, or I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't use your term. Do you own the term?
I don't own the term. I don't know who does own the term.
Well, I'm going to call it Kevin Herschel's construction defect golden triangle.
He said stool. He said three legs of the stool. I'm thinking that from him. He said that, not me. I didn't come up with that.
That's like, I don't know. That's overboard. That's two descriptions. You can't. That's being like, that's not fair.
All right. So are you ready? You're ready for the last corner of the triangle, the third leg of the stool? It is damages. And so what this really gets at, Ray, was the question you asked earlier: is it worth it? So you may have somebody, dead to rights. They may be flush with money, but if the damages are they forgot a piece of flashing and it's $5 or $10, or it's the grass doesn't look so good, we can pay the landscaper maybe to oversee that. That's going to be a $5,000 or $10,000 thing. There's often, and this is kind of what I talked about, through the punch list process, there are a lot of things that just wouldn't justify spending, a lawyer on it. So they may be nuisances, annoyances, and I can't tell you that, these are hard and fast rules, but I would say if it is less than six figures, you have a decent chance of spending more money, in legal fees if this is going to be a long drawn out thing. Now, if it's a very isolated issue and it's a $50,000 or $75,000 issue and it's going to be simple to prove, that may be a different story. But in most cases, there's a long list of 10 or 15 things that are wrong here. And if the damages don't justify actually investing that money, you may have to consider whether we should just impose an assessment, move on in life. But at the very least, in order to kind of find this, you should be sending demand letters and doing an investigation. I mean, that's the bare minimum. After that, you do have to, if the engineer report comes back and says there's 15 things wrong, but it's $25,000, you may want to consider whether litigation is the best route or not.
Why can't I just say, if the lawyer won't take it on contingency, it's not worth the effort? I don't mind if you jump all over me for saying it.
But might
So-
not be. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
I mean, that may be true, but if you got $10 million in damages and something needs to get fixed because everybody is getting rained on because the roof leaks, you can't just say, well, they didn't take it on contingency. I mean, you're going to have to live in the tropical rainforest.
Yeah.
But a lawyer is going to take that on contingency if there's any case involved with it. Yes, no, or
Dave and I said it depends. Sometimes,
It depends,
yes, sometimes it's going to be the blended fee. Sometimes,
Man.
I mean,
In New
Just-
Jersey, you're more likely to take a case like that because of the charitable insurance related concepts. We actually had one of the big cases about probably about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, called Cypress Point, big New Jersey Supreme Court case, and the ruling was that commercial general liability policies have to provide coverage for consequential damage caused by the work of other contractors. That opened the door to the collectability leg, to make it more likely than not that a lawyer who knew what he or she was doing would take that case. And so New Jersey, you tend to have an easier time shopping a contingency case, because lawyers who know what they're doing are fairly confident that there'll be some coverage if there's consequential damage. So the minute you show a lawyer in New Jersey minutes of owners standing up in the room going, my windows leak, my windows leak, my windows leak, that to me is enough probably to really strongly consider a contingency case, because then I know I can prove consequential damage. These contractors, even the shady ones, have some level of commercial general liability insurance. And then I know there's money at the end. It may take a while, but there's money there somewhere, at least enough to cover, you're not gonna go with nothing. You're never gonna go to trial. You're gonna have coverage, and the insurance companies are going to be begging you to settle at the end. They may not pay you everything you want, but there'll be a process, a formal mediation process at the end where everyone wants to be in the room because no one wants to go to trial. In New Jersey, that's almost always how they end up.
right.
and Ray,
So-
I hope you're sitting down for this, but sometimes I have offered contingency, blended or hourly. And if the board thinks that this case isn't going to drag on for a long time, or they have a great case, they think they will actually pay less money hourly. And sometimes that's true than they would on a contingency. I mean, sometimes on the lawyer end, if you get a contingency and it settles, a month after you file the complaint and it's a $3 million settlement, you probably haven't done $1 million worth of work, but you get paid that. So some board, for that reason, they will say, I would prefer an hourly, contract. And so, like I said, every situation is really kind of different. And a lot of it really depends on, their history with the developer, the negotiations, the scope of everything.
That's crazy. It sounds greedy. It's
I'll
crazy,
add a-
greedy. It sounds against your fiduciary duty to do so. It sounds like gambling. It sounds like you're not trying to really solve a problem that you really, if you're confident with the lawyer, I don't know what the logic would be to go that route. So why make extra money on something when the goal is just to get it back to where it belongs?
Well, it's what the legal fee is.
Yeah. Let me add a
If it's contingency, you're not going to have legal fees.
No, but your settlement would be reduced by, well, like I said,
Right.
And then why would you gamble?
No. You're Kevin's totally right. There's a subfolder in his triad thing, which is if a lawyer is very optimistic about a contingency case and you can afford to pay him, you should almost always pay him, because you will pay less. The reason why you do a contingency case as a board is not because you want to spend less. You do it because you can't afford to pay a lawyer. It's almost always cheaper just to pay the lawyer, because 30% of $5 million is $1.5 million. Lawyer's not going to spend $1.5 million on fees for a case that's worth $5 million. So you'd be a fool. And then when you go to settle the case, your engineer says, you know what, you need $4 million. The insurance companies and the developer offer you $2.2 million. That's a pretty good offer. But then you got to pay your lawyer 30%. So before you know it, you're holding 30% of what you need. But if you just would have paid the lawyer an hourly, you might be into it for $500,000, let's say. But the contingency, you have to pay your lawyer maybe $700-800 grand. So if a lawyer wants a contingency case, but you can afford to pay him month by month, you should almost never do a contingency. You only do contingencies when you can't afford to pay the lawyer.
Oh my gosh.
Not because the money, not because you think you're going to pay less or more. If you're going to pay, my view, now it isn't always the case, but my experience tells me that you can almost never pay a lawyer more in hourly lawyer fees than you'll pay with a contingency case at the end, because a lawyer's not going to take the case if he's going to lose. So there's no risk. If a lawyer wants to take the contingency case, you're going to win.
There's so
Give me
many
something.
misconceptions about construction defect cases, because I think my opinions are in line with what a lot of board members and managers think. Honestly, like, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they differ too much from my level of knowledge would be that of an average board member or manager. And
I mean, it's a simple choice. I mean, if I told you at the beginning of this, I had a crystal ball, we're going to recover $3 million. Do you want to pay me $1 million or $50,000 to recover that same $3 million, and the rest goes to you?
well, I may.
What are you thinking, Ray?
I may, because I don't want to risk paying you all this money and then losing.
But if the lawyer is willing to do it on a contingency, the lawyer's made the decision already that it's unlikely you're going to lose.
But he's doing that on a contingency based on that knowledge. Why else would he take it on? That defeats
Right.
the whole
So you
purpose
use
of
the knowledge. You have to use the knowledge against the lawyer. The lawyer is not going to take a contingency case when it's almost assuredly going to lose. He's going to take it when he's almost assuredly going to win. Therefore, you should have a realistic assessment that you're going to get money at the end. Why would you give under Kevin's example? Why would you give a guy a third of your recovery when you can get out of it for 5%? Why would you give him 30?
The whole relationship of a contingency case and the parts of it is that the lawyer, that the lawyer is super confident that they're going to win and get that money, obviously, or they wouldn't take the case.
Right.
But,
so why give the guy a third when you can get away with giving him
because
only
I have
5%?
to depend on then I have to depend on his opinion in the beginning and believe that it's 100%
but you have to trust the guy you're dealing
exactly.
with.
I have to trust the lawyer who really wants the money on the contingency. How do I know he's not misrepresenting himself and telling me it's a slam dunk? And it's not, and he just wants
because from a capitalist model, he's going to tell you that the case is I'm going to do this on a contingency. He's basically telling you that he's confident he's going to get money.
Maybe he's trying to outsmart you, though. Maybe he knows
being stupid.
Because if he tells you it's a slam dunk, your inclination is going to be, I don't want you to think I contingency. I'll pay you.
Just like George Tenet should never have said it was a slam dunk that Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. No lawyer should ever say it's a slam dunk that you're in a case you have.
Let's do closing thoughts, and I'm probably going to have to go back to this. I learned so much from this. I'm probably going to have to break it into pieces and backtrack. All right, closing thoughts, because I actually have to be somewhere at 2:15. No. I don't have your lifestyle, both of you guys. Kevin's probably getting a massage in half an hour. I don't know, after hour, cocktail drinks somewhere, losing with famous people.
Let's hope we don't read about Kevin in the paper with his massages.
Only if a few of my contingency cases hit, Ray. But in any event, my closing thoughts here are, number one, don't be an ostrich. I see a lot of boards when they take over, they put their head in the sand. This is the time to be proactive. Get your engineering report, talk to your lawyer, figure out exactly what needs to be done. Starting somewhere, I see is just the biggest problem is boards never start, and then too much time passes. Statute of limitations is gone. Number two, we'll go back to the golden triangle, the three-legged stool. When evaluating whether to do this, it's all the name of the game: collectability, liability, and damages. And number three, I will just tell you, who you hire. We've gone back and forth. Do you have confidence in your lawyer? Is this going to be hourly contingency? You got to hire somebody who's been through this before, who's done this, that has experience in it. Because I've seen a lot of these go south pretty quickly that have been handled by people that dabble or don't know that there's special rules that apply to condos, special statute of limitations that may not necessarily apply in other construction cases. So those are my 3 best pieces of advice for you today, Ray.
So don't hire my nephew, who's just graduated from law school, because it's a slam dunk, because he tells me it is. All right.
In your world, if he takes non-contingency, yes, but my advice to that would be no.
All right, Dave. Closing.
My closing thought is I think all of Kevin's points are good, and I'll go back to something he said earlier. I think which we have talked about in other live streams, and which we passed over here pretty quickly because we were talking about other things. But he made a comment earlier about sort of like, offloading the liability, like relying on third parties. Board members can sort of get a jail free card for their own liability if they rely on the advice of experts and professionals. I think that's really important for a board early on when you're in a new community and you have a limited amount of time to hold people responsible for their misdeeds. You should, even if it costs you money, and it will, I gather, you should hire experts and lawyers and have them give you advice from a lawyer you need, and have the experts give you the engineering and architectural advice you need. You can make a different decision. You could choose to go a bunch of different ways, but by doing that, you basically put the liability on them. If the lawyer gives you bad advice, he's got liability to you. If the engineer and the architect give you bad advice, they go to the wrong site and they look at the wrong building, and they have liability to you. So you've essentially, by relying on third parties, lawyers and experts, you've offloaded your liability to other people who are better situated, better positioned to manage the liability. And that's something that's very important in the transition context, because the stakes are remarkably high.
We have to do a topic that is basically how to offload your liability onto others. And that's what I'm going to call it. And that would be like a slam dunk. That's why I like pre-recording these, because I have like 1,000 other topics now. Obviously, and okay. All right. I will.
So the risk of getting Dave going again, if we do that, I will tell you the one entity that should have liability that typically doesn't is the government.
Oh, government's horrible. Government's horrible.
They have like an endless amount of lawyers for free.
Well, it's funny.
Well, no, it's governmental immunity. I mean, they can do
Yeah.
they can do the worst job inspecting these things. They don't even need to go in. They can drive by and wave.
But everybody knows not to count on. We've said on the live streams 1,000 times that the building inspector
horrible.
has no liability to.
But you mentioned earlier about like regular people sort of not understanding the construction defect type of thing. Regular people believe that the government actually made sure the building was built correctly. Like,
all right, I'll see you guys. Thank you.
I got to do it.
All right,
yeah,
sounds good. Thanks, guys.
See you. Bye.